The rain finds a way. It always does. It drips through the pine boughs above this shattered farmhouse I'm using for cover, a steady, cold tap-tap-tap on the broken tiles above my head. It soaks into the wool of my greatcoat until the weight of it feels like I'm carrying another man on my shoulders. But in here, tucked into what's left of a kitchen, with a mostly dry wall at my back, it's as close to peace as I've known in months. The others are a dozen paces away, huddled under a canvas lean-to, their low murmurs and the occasional strike of a match the only signs of life. France is trying to get a fire going with damp wood, and the smell of wet smoke and failed attempts hangs in the air. It's in this small pocket of quiet that I finally fish out the pencil stub and the grimy, folded piece of paper I've been carrying since Kharkov. The paper's soft at the creases, almost worn through, stained with God knows what mud, maybe blood, a smear of SCO-Car-Cola from a lifetime ago. Just holding it feels like a rebellion. This isn't for reports or inventory lists. This is for you, Muddy. This is for home. The lead scratches against the rough surface, a sound so ordinary it's almost shocking. My fingers are stiff with cold, clumsy, and my handwriting, which you always said was so elegant, looks like a child's scrawl. It's hard to even remember how to form the words. My mind is so full of other things. The coordinates for the mortar barrage at dawn, the sound of Ivan's artillery, the gnawing emptiness in my belly. I start with the lies. They come easiest. My dearest family, I hope this letter finds you well. We are holding strong here. The food is adequate. The weather is improving. Adequate. A word that means nothing. The bread we got yesterday was hard as a brick. We had to soak it in coffee to even get our teeth into it. And it was full of sawdust. I swear you could taste the pine. Improving weather. That's a good one. The rain is just above freezing, and the mud, my God, the mud. It's not just mud anymore. It's a creature, a hungry, sucking thing that steals your boots right off your feet if you're not careful. It smells of rot and decay, a sweet, terrible smell that gets in your clothes and never leaves you. But I can't write about that. I can't tell you about the lice that crawl in the seams of my uniform, a constant, itching plague that we call the partisans. We sit for hours, when we have hours, picking them off and crushing them between our thumbnails with a soft pop. You don't need that picture in your head. You need to see your son, standing tall, doing his duty. So I write the lies, and for a moment, while I'm writing them, I can almost believe them myself. The war feels distant, like a bad play I'm watching from the back row. But then a shell screams over, far away, but close enough, and the floorboards tremble, and a little shower of plaster dust drifts down from the ceiling onto the paper. The war isn't distant. It's right here in this room, breathing down my neck. It's terrifyingly close. And then I stop writing the letter I'm going to send, and I start writing the one I never will. The pencil moves slower now, digging deeper into the paper. This is the one for me. I write about the faces. Young Klaus, he couldn't have been more than 18, fresh off the farm with cheeks still round like a boy's. He was so proud of his new helmet, polished it every chance he got. A piece of shrapnel from a Katyusha took him in the throat near the Dnieper bend. He didn't make a sound, just looked surprised, like he'd been caught stealing apples. And old man Becker, a veteran of the last war, who always had a dirty joke and a piece of sausage to share. He taught me how to listen for the difference between an incoming shell and one that's already passed over. A sniper got him, one shot right between the eyes. He was smoking a cigarette, telling one of his jokes, and then he just stopped. The emptiness they left behind isn't a loud thing. It's a quiet space in the formation, a bunk no one wants to take, a silence where a laugh used to be. I want to describe the cold to you, the kind that seeps into your bones and sets up house there. It's worse than the fear sometimes. The fear is a sharp, electric thing. It comes and goes with the shelling. But the cold is constant, a dull ache that lives in your joints, that makes your teeth chatter so hard you think they'll shatter. And the hunger. Your stomach doesn't just growl, it curls up on itself, a tight, painful fist. You dream of your mother's potato soup, the smell of it, the warmth of the bowl in your hands, and you wake up with spit in your mouth and that same hollow ache. But how could I ever put on paper the shame? The guilt that sits in your gut heavier than any meal. There was a village a few weeks back. We were told it was cleared. It was. A shot rang out from a barn, and Werner, a guy from my hometown, he just fell. Something in us broke. We went through that place like demons. I remember kicking in a door, my rifle stock smashing into a man's face, the sound of it, the wet crunch. He was probably just a farmer trying to protect his pigs. I don't know. I'll never know. I took his watch, a stupid silver pocket watch. I threw it into a river the next day, but I can still feel its weight in my pocket. I can still see his eyes. That's the truth. That's the war, not flags and glory. It's mud and blood and things you do that you can never, ever undo. So why? Why, when I know in my heart it's over? When the news from the west is bad and the news from the east is a nightmare? When we see the jets screaming overhead, jets we have no answer for, and we're still dragging horses through this cursed mud. Why do I lift this rifle when the ground shakes from the Stalin's organs? It's not for the fatherland anymore. That word means nothing out here. It's a word for speeches in Berlin, far from the stink of death. It's not for him, the man with the silly mustache who got us into this inferno. We don't even say his name anymore. It's become a curse. If I ever see him, I think I'd spit at his feet. No, it's for Karl, big, dumb, beautiful Karl from Hamburg. He had a laugh that could shake the ice off the trees. He took a piece of me with him when he died. It was in that damned forest, the one they call the Cauldron. A mortar round landed right in our hole. It was just luck, pure stupid luck, that I was a few feet away grabbing more ammo. The blast threw me like a ragdoll. When the ringing in my ears stopped, I crawled back. There was nothing left of Schmidt, just red mist. And Karl, he was lying there, his legs gone from the knees down. His face was pale as milk, but his eyes were clear. He grabbed my collar, his grip still strong. He was coughing up blood, and he said, "Erich, look after the new boys, the young ones. They don't know anything." And then he smiled, a bloody, terrible smile, and he said, "Tell my Anna, tell her I was thinking of her apple strudel." And he was gone, just like that. A promise made to a dying man is a chain around your soul. You can't break it. So when little Friedrich, who's been with us 3 weeks and still jumps at his own shadow, looks at me with those scared-rabbit eyes, I have to be steady. I have to show him how to dig the hole deeper, how to check the firing pin in the cold, how to wrap his feet so the frostbite doesn't take them. I made a promise. And there's the other fear, the one they planted in us from the beginning. Not the fear of Ivan's bullets, but the fear of dishonor. What happens if I surrender? What happens to you, Mutty, to little Lart? Will they brand you the family of a coward, a traitor? Will they take your ration cards? Will the party men come in the night? The thought of you suffering because of my failure, my desire to just lie down and let it all be over, that's a fear sharper than any bayonet. It's a prison. They've made our own homes into a prison we can't escape from. So we fight because the alternative for you is worse. But if I'm being truly, brutally honest, down in the animal part of my brain, that's all that's left most days. It's even simpler than that. It's the sunrise. After a long, freezing night on sentry duty, your body numb, your mind playing tricks on you with every shadow, the sky starts to lighten in the east. First it's just a grey smudge, then a faint line of pink, then orange, and finally a sliver of the sun itself, pale and cold but alive. And you feel this stubborn, stupid animal relief. You made it. You saw the sun rise one more time. There's no grand reason. There's no strategy. It's just the sheer, dumb will of a body that wants to keep breathing, a heart that wants to keep beating. It's because I am here, and for as long as I am here, I will fight. For the man next to me, for the ghost of a promise, for the next sunrise. The pencil lead snaps. I don't have a knife to sharpen it, so I just bite the wood away, spitting splinters until the lead is exposed again. It's a crude point, but it will do. I finish the real letter, the one of lies, with all my love, your devoted son, Erich. I fold it carefully, precisely, a small, neat rectangle. It's a tiny act of order in this world of chaos. It's something I can control. Then I take the other pages, the ones filled with the truth, and I fold them too, but differently, into a tighter, smaller square. This one I don't put with the outgoing mail pouch. This one I slide into the breast pocket of my tunic, right over my heart. It sits there next to the worn photograph of you all, the one where Lart is smiling with her front teeth missing. It's a secret burden, a weight I choose to carry. It's the truth of who I am now and what I've done. No one else needs to carry that. France finally gets the fire going. A weak, sputtering flame, but it casts a flickering light on the faces of the men. They look old, so much older than their years. Their faces are grimy and gaunt, their eyes hollow. But they are here. We are here. I tuck the sendable letter into my map case and stand up, my joints protesting. The rain hasn't stopped. It will never stop. I walk back to the Linto and squeeze in between Friedrich and Hermann. Herman hands me a tin cup of bitter, hot ersatz coffee. It tastes like burnt grain, but the warmth of the cup in my hands is a small miracle. Friedrich is trying to clean his rifle, his fingers fumbling with the bolt. "Here," I say, my voice rough. "Let me show you. You've got to keep it dry or it'll jam when you need it most." I take the rifle from him. The metal is cold and familiar. This is it. This is the whole war right here. Not in Berlin, not in Moscow. It's in this muddy field, under a leaking canvas, showing a scared kid how to stay alive for one more hour. I'm not fighting for a flag. I'm fighting for the man in this foxhole next to me. And as long as he needs me, I will be here, writing my unsent letters, keeping my promises, waiting for the sun to rise. You see this picture? That's me, but it's not me. That's the thing they don't tell you. The man in that photo, he's got my face, but his eyes are already gone. We used to call it the 1,000-yard stare, but that's too simple. It's not about distance. It's about a wall you build inside your head, brick by brick, with everything you see that no man should ever have to see. By 44, by the time we were falling back through France, then into the Reich itself, that wall was so thick and so high that nothing, not even fear, could get through anymore. Fear is a luxury for the new guys, the replacements who still jump at the sound of a twig snapping. For guys like me, fear was a memory, like the taste of my mother's apple strudel or the feeling of a girl's hand in mine. It belonged to another life. What replaced it was kind of heavy numbness, a constant weight on your chest that made every breath an effort. You stop feeling the war in your heart and start feeling it in your bones, in the ache of your joints when the rain comes, in the automatic clench of your jaw when the world goes quiet. You learn the sounds, see. A new guy hears artillery and he just hears noise, a terrifying crash. An old dog like me, I could tell you the caliber by the whistle. I could guess the distance by the time between the flash and the thump. You'd be lying in your hole, the dirt shaking loose around you, and you'd be counting, not even thinking about it, just counting like a machine. 5, 6, that one's a kilometer away. 2, 3, that one's coming in close. Your body just knows. Your hands check your rifle, the bolt, the magazine, without you telling them to. Your eyes scan for the best way out of the hole, for the lowest crawl, all while your brain is just empty. It's a strange thing to feel your body working like a well-oiled machine while your soul has gone to sleep somewhere deep inside. You develop habits, little things that keep you alive. You never bunch up. You see a couple of green replacements huddling together for warmth or comfort, and you bark at them to spread out. One shell shouldn't get 2 men. It's a brutal math, but it's the only math that matters. You dig. My God, how we dug. Your entrenching tool becomes your best friend. You learn to love the smell of fresh-turned earth because it means cover. It means another few inches between you and the shrapnel. You don't just dig a scrape. You dig a home. You make a shelf for your ammo. You smooth out a place to lay your head. You figure out the drainage for when the rain comes. And you always know where your closest cover is. A fallen tree, a crater from a previous shell, a stone wall. You're constantly making a map in your head, not of towns and roads, but of hiding places. The battlefield talks to you if you know how to listen. It's not in the officers' briefings, it's in the smells. The sweet, rotten smell of a corpse that's been in the sun too long, a smell that gets into your uniform and your hair, and you can taste it in your rations. The sharp, electric smell of cordite after a firefight. The damp, cold smell of the forest at dawn, a smell that usually means a few hours of quiet. And the sounds. The distant rattle of a machine gun, the pop-a-pop of rifle fire, the crump of a mortar. You learn what's close and what's far, what's coming your way and what's just background noise. You even get superstitious. I knew a guy from Hamburg who had to tap the butt of his rifle 3 times before he stepped out of a trench. Another fellow always put on his left boot before his right. Me, I had a little photograph of my sister, Liesel. It was frayed at the edges, stained with God knows what. But before things got hot, I'd always touch my breast pocket, just to make sure it was still there. It wasn't a prayer, really. It was just a ritual, a tiny piece of order in a world that had gone completely mad. You cling to these things because they make you feel like you still have some control, even when you know you have none. And you do it for the men next to you. That's the truth of it, the only thing that makes any sense. It wasn't for the fatherland anymore, not after you'd seen what the fatherland had become, the hollowed refugees streaming past you, the cities burning behind you. It wasn't for Hitler. Most of us had stopped saying his name except as a curse. You fought for the man in the hole to your left and your right. You fought because if you ran, he might die. It was that simple. There's a language among veterans, a language without words. A glance across a crater that says, "You see that machine gun nest in the hedgerow?" A nod that says, "I'll cover you." A shared cigarette in a quiet moment, the smoke hanging in the cold air, saying everything about exhaustion and companionship without a single syllable being spoken. When a new replacement would show up, his uniform still crisp, his eyes wide with a fear we'd all forgotten, you didn't welcome him. You resented him. He was a liability. He'd make a mistake and get you killed. But you'd take him under your wing anyway, not out of kindness, but out of a cold, hard necessity. You de-show him how to dig a proper foxhole, how to clean his rifle in the mud, how to heat a tin of stew over a candle without burning it. You teach him the unspoken rules because his life was now tied to yours. His survival was your survival. And if he didn't make it, and so many of them didn't, you'd feel a guilt that was worse than anger, a heavy, sick feeling. You'd take his dog tags, maybe his letters, and promise yourself you'd write to his mother, but you never did. What could you possibly say? Your son died because he didn't keep his head down fast enough. That bond, that terrible bond forged in shared suffering, becomes a heavier burden than any pack you carry. It's a chain that keeps you moving forward, because letting go would mean failing them, the ones who didn't make it. Their faces are sometimes clearer to me than the faces of my own children. There was Klaus, with his big laugh that could cut through the gloom. He loved to sing, always off-key, and he'd talk about his family's bakery in Dresden. He said after the war, he'd teach me how to make a proper pretzel. A shell got him outside a village whose name I've forgotten. One moment he was there, humming some folk song, the next, just silence. And Friedrich, a quiet man, an artist before the war. He'd sketch little pictures on the margins of maps, birds and trees. He had a wife and a new baby girl he'd never seen. A sniper's bullet in the Ardennes. I still have one of his sketches, a crumpled little thing of a bird on a branch. I keep it in the same box as that photo. These men, they're my real comrades. Not the ones who survived, but the ones we left in the dirt of Russia, in the snow of the Bulge, in the mud of Normandy. You start to long for the end, for peace, with a desperation that's like a physical pain. You dream of a soft bed, of a hot meal that isn't from a tin, of silence that isn't just the calm before the storm. But then this other feeling creeps in, a cold terror. What will peace mean? What will I be? This war, this nightmare, is all I've known for years. It's my job. It's my purpose, as twisted as that sounds. Who am I without a rifle in my hand? What do I do when I don't have to check for cover every 10 seconds? The thought of going home, of sitting at a table and trying to make conversation, it was terrifying. Because stopping, finally stopping, would mean that wall you built would have to come down. And behind it was everything you'd seen, everything you'd done, all the faces of the dead, waiting for you. So you just keep going. You fight not to win, but because stopping is more frightening than advancing. You fight because the man next to you is still fighting, and to quit would be to betray him. You become a machine, a tired, worn-out machine, fueled by habit and loyalty, and a deep, deep exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. I remember the last days, the chaos. The roads were jammed with broken-down vehicles and desperate people. The air was thick with the sound of our own flak, and the scream of Russian Katyushas, we called them Stalin's organs, a horrible, wailing sound that seemed to tear the sky itself apart. The orders made no sense. One day it was hold at all costs. The next it was a frantic retreat. We were a ragged bunch, a handful of veterans surrounded by boys from the Hitler Youth and old men from the Volkssturm, their faces full of a belief we had lost long ago. We were just trying to get west, to surrender to the Americans or the British, because we'd heard stories from the East that were worse than the battlefield. Surrender wasn't a shameful thing anymore. It was a ticket to maybe, just maybe, seeing tomorrow. When it finally ended for me, it wasn't with a bang, but with a whimper. It was a grey morning, and we were in a field somewhere. We saw American soldiers advancing, moving carefully, professionally. We'd already thrown away anything that identified us as SS, not that it mattered anymore. Our lieutenant, a kid himself, just looked at us, and we looked at him. There was no discussion. We put our rifles down slowly and raised our hands. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Not a shot, just the wind and the distant caw of a crow. The Americans were cautious but not brutal. They took our watches, our cigarettes, but they gave us their rations. I remember tasting the chocolate for the first time. It was so sweet it made my teeth ache. And I looked at the young American soldier guarding me. He couldn't have been more than 18, and I saw in his eyes the same confusion, the same weariness that I'm sure was in mine. We were just boys, on different sides of a tragedy that was bigger than all of us. They put us in a cage, just a field with barbed wire around it, and for the first time in years, I had nothing to do. No weapon to clean, no hole to dig, no patrol to dread. And that's when it started to happen. The wall began to crack. In the silence, the memories came flooding back, not as big pictures, but as small, terrible details. The feel of the mud in Stalingrad, so cold it burned your skin. The smell of a burning tank of cooked meat and oil. The sound of a wounded man crying for his mother in the night. I'd close my eyes, and I'd see Klaus's face, Friedrich's sketch. I'd wake up at night, sweating, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. That's the cost of endurance. You think you've survived, but the war doesn't leave you. It finds a home inside you. It sleeps in your bones and wakes you up with nightmares. You go home, you try to build a life, you have a family, you find a job. But a part of you is always in that foxhole, always listening for the whistle of the shell, always touching your breast pocket for a photograph that's no longer there. The 1,000-yard stare. It's not something you have. It's something that has you. And you carry it with you long after the guns have fallen silent. You never forget the first one you can't save. It wasn't like in the training manuals, clean and clinical. This was outside a village with a name I've spent 50 years trying to forget, the mud so deep it felt like the earth itself was trying to swallow us whole. The air was thick with the smells of cordite and wet wool and something else, something sweet and metallic that I later learned was the smell of a man's life leaving his body. The shelling had stopped for a moment, that eerie quiet that's almost worse than the noise, because you know it's just the universe holding its breath. Then I heard the crying. Not screaming, not yelling, just this low, guttural sobbing, like a lost child. I found him propped against the splintered stump of a tree, a kid from my own company, couldn't have been more than 18. Hands. He had a baby face and always talked about his family's bakery back in Hamburg. His uniform jacket was already soaked through, a dark, spreading stain that wasn't from the rain. When I pulled the fabric aside, my hands trembling so bad I could barely work, I saw it. It wasn't a neat bullet hole. It was a ragged, awful tear, and things were in there that shouldn't be seeing the light of day. I fumbled for my bag, for the bandages, for the morphine, my mind racing through the steps they drilled into us back in Bavaria. But then this cold, sickening clarity washed over me. No bandage in the world was big enough. No amount of morphine would do anything but maybe fog the edges for a few minutes. I looked at his face, pale and beaded with sweat, and his eyes locked onto mine. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were asking why. Why this? Why here? Why him? And in that look I saw the entire, stupid, monstrous absurdity of the war reflected back at me. I held his hand, my own covered in his blood, and I just kept saying, "It's okay, Hans, it's okay." A lie so pathetic it choked me. I felt a helplessness then that was far more terrifying than any Russian artillery barrage. The enemy you can fight, you can hide from. But that feeling, that you're just a boy with a little bag of tricks staring into a bottomless pit, that stays with you. The light faded from his eyes right there, and the question in them never left me. It's the first thing I see when I close my eyes, even now. After that, you learn to build a wall inside your head, brick by brick, just to keep functioning. The front line wasn't a line at all. It was a bloody mess, a swirling chaos where the only rule was to patch up whoever you could, as fast as you could. Triage. They taught us the word, but they never taught you how it feels to have 3 men screaming your name at once, each one bleeding out, each one believing you're some kind of angel who can fix them. Your brain starts making these cold, brutal calculations that have nothing to do with humanity and everything to do with simple, awful arithmetic. That one over there, his breathing's already a wet rattle. He's gone. You can't waste the supplies. This one here, it's a leg wound, bad, but you can get a tourniquet on it. He might make it if the shock doesn't kill him. And the third, his face is a mask of blood, but he's still cursing, still fighting, so you go to him first. The sounds are the worst of it. The moaning, the begging, the prayers to a God who clearly wasn't listening. And the smells, God, the smells. Blood, yes, but also the coppery scent of fear sweat, the stench of torn intestines, the damp wool of the uniforms, the acrid tang of explosives. We never had enough. Never enough bandages, never enough morphine, never enough sulfur powder. I'd use a man's own torn shirt to staunch the flow, use a branch from a shattered tree as a splint for a shattered leg. You'd rifle through a dead man's pack, not for loot, but for a relatively clean sock to use as a dressing. And in the middle of that hell, a strange calm would sometimes descend. It's the only way I can describe it. The personal fear, the urge to curl up in a hole and weep, just gets pushed aside. Your hands stop shaking. Your mind focuses on the task, not this bandage. Find the vein for the morphine, whisper a few words of nonsense comfort. You become a machine, a tool, and for a little while, that's the only thing that keeps you sane. You're not a soldier anymore, you're a pair of hands, and those hands have a job to do. One of the hardest days was in a forest. The pine trees all snapped like matchsticks from the shelling. The fighting had been close, brutal, tree to tree. We'd pushed forward, and I was moving through the carnage, checking our boys, when I almost tripped over him. A Russian. He was lying on his back, his uniform a darker shade of green than ours, his face pale under the grime. He'd taken a burst of machine gun fire across the chest and stomach. He was breathing in short, ragged gasps, and his eyes were open, staring up at the grey sky through the broken branches. My first instinct was pure, cold hatred. That uniform. The same uniform worn by the men who had killed Hans, who had shelled us for days on end, who were the reason I was in this frozen hell. I should have kept walking. I had my own men to care for, but I stopped. I couldn't help it. He was just a kid like Hans. Maybe he had a bakery back in Smolensk or wherever. He made a small sound, a whimper, and his hand twitched. And in that moment the political hatred, all the propaganda they'd fed us about the subhuman Bolsheviks, it just evaporated. It was overwhelmed by this basic human reflex. He was suffering. I could ease it. It was that simple. I knelt down, my medical bag between us like a white flag. He looked at me, and there was no hatred in his eyes, just a vast, bottomless fear. I didn't speak Russian, and he didn't speak German, but we didn't need words. I showed him the morphine syringe. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I administered the dose, my hands doing the work they were trained to do. For a minute, we just stayed like that, two enemies in a silent understanding that transcended the war. He closed his eyes, and his breathing eased. He didn't die right then, but he was comfortable. I left him there. I never told my buddies about it. Some would have understood, others would have called me a traitor. But in that moment, I wasn't a German soldier, and he wasn't a Russian soldier. We were just two boys, caught in a machine that was grinding us both to dust, and we shared a sliver of peace amidst the madness. You ask why we kept fighting. It wasn't for the fatherland anymore. By 44, 45, that was a joke, a bitter punchline to a joke nobody was laughing at. Hitler's speeches on the radio sounded like the ravings of a madman, completely detached from the mud and blood we were living in. It wasn't for some grand ideology. It was for the man next to you. It was for the small victories. Like when you get a bleeding artery clamped off, and the guy would squeeze your arm and whisper a thank you through gritted teeth. That whisper, that tiny spark of gratitude in all that darkness, it was like a shot of adrenaline. It made the horror worthwhile, if only for a second. The infantrymen, they looked at us medics differently. They didn't see us as just another soldier. They saw us as hope. The absolute trust they placed in you was a responsibility heavier than any rifle, any pack, any order from a general 100 miles behind the lines. When a man is bleeding out in your arms, and he looks at you like you're his only chance at seeing another sunrise, you don't think about winning the war. You think about winning him that sunrise. You fight to get him out of that ditch, to get him to the relative safety of a field hospital, to buy him a few more hours, a few more days. My war became very small, very simple. It was about the next bandage, the next dose of morphine, the next life I might be able to snatch back from the Reaper. My bag was always packed, not because I was eager for the next fight, but because I knew that somewhere, a few hundred yards away, one of my buddies was going to need what was in it. We were all just trying to survive, to see home again. The dark humor was our armor. We joke about the lousy food, the incompetent officers we called Ririchellan commandos, the irony of getting a Dear Johann letter from a girl back home right before you had to go over the top. We'd talk about the beers we were going to drink, the girls we were going to kiss, the simple pleasure of sleeping in a real bed. That homesickness was a physical ache, a constant hollow feeling in your gut. You'd dream of your mother's cooking, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of rain on a peaceful roof to anything to escape the reality of the frozen mud, the constant gnawing fear, and the coppery taste of blood in the air. In the end, we were just a bunch of scared kids, far from home, doing terrible things to each other for reasons that made less and less sense with each passing day. We kept fighting because stopping meant your friend would die. We kept fighting for the promise of a tomorrow we weren't sure we'd ever see. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, you'd look up at the stars through the smoke and haze, and you'd wonder if the Russian medic, 1,000 yards away, was looking at those same stars, thinking the same thoughts, just wanting it all to end, just wanting to go home. You want to know why we kept fighting? It wasn't for the fatherland, not by the end. It wasn't for the Fuhrer, that's for damn sure. You think we gave a damn about politics when our boots were frozen to our feet and our bellies were scraping against our spines? No, you fight because there's no other choice. You fight because the man next to you is fighting. You fight because stopping means dying, and you're just not ready to die yet, even when you're so tired you think death might be a soft, warm bed. Let me tell you about Russia. Not what you read in the books, but what it felt like. The cold. God, the cold. You've never felt cold like that. It's not just a temperature, it's a living thing, an enemy that's smarter and crueler than any Soviet commissar. It seeps into you, right through the wool and the leather, into your bones. It settles there, a deep, aching presence that never leaves. Your breath freezes on your scarf, turns it into a stiff board of ice against your face. Your rifle metal would stick to your bare skin if you were stupid enough to touch it. We de-huddle together in our holes in the ground, 4 or 5 of us pressed so tight you couldn't tell whose limb was whose, just a shivering mass of desperate warmth. We burned anything that would catch old newspapers, the splintered wood from a broken cart, the pages of a book you couldn't read anymore. I saw men burn their own letters from home, just for a minute of flame, watching the words from their sweethearts and mothers curl into black ash. The fire would hiss and spit, and for a few glorious moments you'd feel a flicker of heat on your face, but the cold was always waiting, just outside that tiny circle of light, patient. And then there was the frostbite. You'd see it happen. A guy would complain his toes felt numb, then they'd go white, then black. Gangrene. The medics, when we had any, would just take the fingers or the toes, or the whole foot if you were unlucky. No anesthesia, just a shot of schnapps and a leather strap to bite on. I remember Franz, a kid from Hamburg. He was maybe 19. He lost 3 toes on his right foot. He didn't cry from the pain. He cried because he knew he'd be sent back, and he was ashamed. Ashamed. Can you believe that? We envied him. We looked at that bloody stump and we thought, lucky bastard, he's going to see Germany again. That's what it did to you. It twisted everything. And the land, it wasn't a country, it was a punishment. An endless, flat nothingness. The steppe. You'd look out and there was just grey. Grey sky meeting grey earth, and you in the middle, a tiny, insignificant speck. It made you feel so alone, even with 1,000 men around you. It sucked the hope right out of you. Then the mud came. The Rasputitsa, they called it. The time without roads. The rain would fall, and the whole world would turn into a thick brown soup. It could swallow a boot right off your foot. I saw trucks, great big half-tracks, sink up to their axles, just swallowed by the earth. We'd push and strain, our muscles screaming, the mud sucking us down, until we were just covered in it, exhausted, defeated. The mud didn't care about your rank or your medals. It was a great equalizer of misery. And the villages, we'd march through what was left of them. Just blackened skeletons of houses, chimneys standing like grave markers. The smell, you never forget the smell of a burnt village. It's a sweet, sickly smell of burnt wood and something else, something worse. Sometimes you'd see them, just lying there in the fields or by the road. Civilians, soldiers, ours, theirs. After a while you didn't even see them as people anymore. They were just things, obstacles, part of the landscape, a world devoid of color or life, just gray, brown, and the deep, dark red of frozen blood. That's when you start to change. Something inside you shuts off. The part of you that feels pity or fear or even hope. It just goes numb like a frost-bitten finger. You become an animal. A hungry, tired, scared animal. Your world shrinks to the size of a potato, a crust of black bread, a cigarette. Food was all you thought about. Real food, not the slop they gave us, that hard, gritty bread we called sweeback that you had to soak in coffee to even bite into, the watery stew with a few chunks of mystery meat. You dream about food. I'd lie awake at night, and I could almost taste my mother's potato pancakes, smell the yeast of a real bakery. Your stomach would gnaw at you, a constant, grinding pain. You'd trade anything for food, a watch, a lighter, a pair of decent socks. I saw a lieutenant trade his pistol for a chicken. A pistol, your officer's sidearm. But a chicken meant soup, real broth, and that was worth more than any weapon. You lose your empathy because you have nothing left to give. You see a buddy get hit, and your first thought is, oh God, is he okay? It's a colder, darker thought. I hope he has some sausage in his pack. It's horrible to say, but it's the truth. You're so hollowed out that there's no room for anyone else's pain. You just focus on putting one foot in front of the other, on surviving the next minute, the next hour. And the rumors, they kept us fighting more than any SS man with a pistol to our heads. The rumors about what happened if you surrendered to the Russians. We'd heard stories, that they didn't take prisoners, that they'd torture you, send you to Siberia to freeze to death in a camp. That it was a fate worse than death. So when the Soviet tanks would come, these endless waves of T-34s, sounding like a rolling earthquake, and their infantry screaming like demons coming out of the fog, you fought. You fought like a cornered rat. Because what was behind you was the vast, cold emptiness of Russia, and what was in front of you was a quick death or a slow one. You chose the quick one. You fought because your buddy, Klaus or Hans or little Erich, was firing his MG-42 next to you, and the sound of that gun, that ripping canvas sound, was the only thing that made you feel safe. You couldn't let him down. But even in all that void, there were moments. Small, fragile moments where you remembered you were still a human being. I remember one night, it was so cold the stars looked like chips of ice. We were dug in somewhere outside of Stalingrad before the pocket closed. The fighting had been hell, just sheer hell. Me and this guy, Werner, we were sharing a foxhole. We hadn't slept in 2 days. We were out of cigarettes, which was a special kind of torture. Then Werner, he fumbles in his pocket and pulls out a single bent cigarette, a zigarette. It was a little crushed, but it was whole. He looks at it, then at me, and he doesn't say a word. He just breaks it in half, careful-like, and hands me one piece. We lit them with shaking hands, cupping the flame from the match like it was the most precious thing in the world. We sat there in the dark, smoking our half-cigarettes in silence. The warmth of the smoke in my lungs it was like a blessing. That tiny, shared act of generosity, in the middle of all that madness, felt more powerful than any speech from a general. It was a defiance, a way of saying, we are still here, we are still men. And sometimes, just before you fell asleep, if the shelling was quiet, you'd let your mind wander. You'd think of home. Not the big ideas, not Germany, but your home, the smell of your mother's kitchen, the sound of the church bells on a Sunday morning, the face of that girl you kissed before you left. It was like a dream, a warm, bright dream from a different lifetime. It felt so far away, so impossibly distant, that it almost hurt to think about. But you did. You clung to those memories like a life raft. They were the only clean, good things left in your head. And then the morning would come, with the screech of the Stalin's organs, and the dream would shatter, and you were back in the mud and the blood. So why did we keep fighting? In the end, you keep going because stopping is not an option your body understands. The war becomes your entire world. The stench of cordite and dirt and unwashed bodies is the only air you breathe. The taste of fear, coppery in your mouth, is the only flavor you know. The constant, low-grade hum of terror is the only music. You can't imagine a life without it. You can't conceive of waking up without the fear, of walking without a weapon in your hand, of sleeping in a soft bed. It's all gone, replaced by this existence. You fight because you've forgotten how to do anything else. You're a ghost already, haunting the ruins of a world you helped destroy, just waiting for the bullet with your name on it. Or waiting for a peace that you know, deep down, will never come for you. You're just trying to survive today. Tomorrow isn't a thing you think about. There is only today, this hour, this minute. And in that minute you fight. You fight to see the next minute. That's all there is. That's the only reason that ever really matters. You never forget the cold. It's the first thing that comes back, even now, all these years later. Not the grand politics, not the names of the generals, but the bone-deep, wet cold that seeped into your boots in a foxhole outside some forgotten French village in the winter of '44. The war was lost. We all knew it. The talk was if any more, but when. The officers still gave their speeches, of course, full of duty and fatherland, but their eyes were empty. We listened with numb ears, our breath misting in the frigid air, and we thought only of the next hour, the next minute, of staying alive. Out there, across a few hundred meters of churned-up mud and shattered trees, were the Americans. To us, they were the armies. We'd hear them at night, their voices carrying on the wind, sounding just like us young, tired and far from home. That was the first crack in the whole damn facade, you know, realizing the monster you're supposed to be fighting has a voice, a cough. Sometimes, when the shelling stopped for a blessed few hours, you'd even hear one of them singing some sad song, and the tune would be the same kind of homesick melody one of our guys might hum. It's a strange thing to be pointing a rifle at a man whose loneliness sounds exactly like your own. We were in these positions for weeks, dug in like rats. The front lines so close you could smell their coffee in the morning, a rich, bitter scent that would drift over and make our own ersatz brew taste like ditch water. The ground was a frozen hellscape of craters and broken things, and the only rule that really mattered was the unwritten one. Don't shoot a man when he's taking a piss. It was a stupid, simple understanding, but it held. You'd see a guy, just a dark shape, stand up from his hole across the way and move a little ways off, and you'd look the other direction. Because tomorrow, it might be you. One afternoon, during a lull so quiet you could hear the crows arguing over some carrion, one of our boys, a kid from Hamburg named Klaus with a big mouth, just stood up. My heart jumped into my throat. "Get down, you idiot," I hissed. But he just cupped his hands and shouted across the void, "Hey, Army, you got cigarettes?" There was a long silence. We all froze, waiting for the crack of a sniper's rifle. Then a voice came back, clear and with a strange accent, "Maybe you got chocolate." And just like that, a conversation started. It was shouted broken, but it was human. We learned the guy's name was Joe, from a place called Ohio. He had a girl back home named Betty. Klaus shouted that he had a fiancée named Greta. They were just two young men, shouting their lives into the frozen air, and for 10 minutes the war didn't exist. It was the most surreal peace I ever knew. Then the moment passed, and we all sank back into our holes, but something had changed. The faceless enemy had a name. He had a Betty. It makes it harder to hate a man when you know the name of the girl he's dreaming of. The real turning point, the thing that carved itself into my soul, happened a few days later. The fog was thick, a grey soup that clung to your uniform and made everything ghostly. We heard a noise, a thrashing, stumbling sound coming from the direction of the American lines. We grabbed our rifles, fingers on cold triggers, peering into the mist. Then he emerged, a dark shape lurching forward. It was an American soldier, his uniform caked in mud and something darker. He was wounded bad. One arm hung useless, and he was leaving a smeared trail of red in the slush behind him. He didn't have a weapon. He was just a kid, maybe 19, his face pale and terrified. He stumbled right into the edge of our position, collapsing against a broken wall. He looked at us, a ring of German soldiers with rifles pointed at him, and I saw the absolute certainty of death in his eyes. He was finished, and he knew it. Our sergeant, a hard old veteran from the Eastern Front named Wagler, pushed his way to the front. He looked down at the boy, his face a granite mask. The orders were clear. Prisoners were a burden we couldn't afford. The unwritten law of the front was often brutal in its simplicity. I held my breath. The American was trying to say something, maybe a prayer, maybe a name. I could see he had a photograph clutched in his good hand, a black and white smudge of a family. Wagler stared at him for what felt like an hour. Then he spat on the ground. He looked at the boy, then jerked his head back towards the American lines. "Verschwind," he growled. "Get lost." He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked back to his post. The rest of us stood there, rifles lowering. The American kid didn't understand the words, but he understood the gesture. Hope, a fragile, impossible thing, flickered in his face. He started to crawl, dragging himself through the mud, back the way he came. Not one of us raised a rifle. We just watched him go, a wounded animal returning to its den. For the rest of that day and the next, not a single shot was fired in our little sector. It was like we'd made a silent agreement. We'd seen each other's humanity, and for a short, precious while, we refused to be animals again. That respect, it grew in other ways too. There was an American sniper they had, a real artist with a rifle. We called him Der Weiss Teufel, the White Ghost, because of some white material he'd weave into his camouflage. He was deadly. You couldn't show your head for more than a second. We hated him, sure, but it was a hate mixed with a grudging, professional admiration. He was just a man doing his job, and doing it better than anyone else. It was like a deadly game of chess. You knew he was out there, and he knew you were hunting him. There was a strange bond in that. One evening I was on watch, shivering in my hole, when I saw a small, dark object arc out from the American lines. It landed with a soft plop in the middle of no man's land. I squinted. It was a small tin. After a while, one of our guys, a foolhardy fellow named Erich, scrambled out and retrieved it. It was American coffee, real coffee. The next day, Erich threw a bundle back a few of our precious cigarettes and a bar of German chocolate. This became a thing. Not every day, but sometimes. A trade in small comforts. You toss a pack of smokes into the crater-scarred earth between us, and later a tin of beef would come back. It was insane. Here we were, trying to kill each other, yet we were bartering like merchants in a market. But it made perfect sense down in the mud. The real enemy wasn't the man in the opposite trench. He was just a poor bastard stuck in the same freezing hell as you. The real enemy was the war itself, the endless, grinding machine that chewed up boys and spat out corpses. It was the hunger, the cold, the fear, the stupid orders from men who were warm and safe miles behind the lines. We were all victims of the same monstrous thing. But the machine doesn't stop for humanity. The orders came down one brittle, clear morning. We were to attack, a full-scale assault on the American positions. My stomach turned to ice. The fragile peace we'd built, that silent truce in the ruins, was about to be shattered by the very insanity we had briefly escaped. As we formed up, checking our weapons with trembling hands, I looked across the field, and I saw him. The American I thought of as Joe, the one who traded shouts with Klaus. He was looking right back at me. We were too far to see faces clearly, but I knew it was him. We held that look for a long second, two soldiers poised to charge and kill each other. And in that look, I swear, there was no hatred. There was only a deep, profound regret, a shared understanding of the terrible futility of what we were about to do. It was a look that said, "I'm sorry. I have no choice. You have no choice." Then the whistle blew and the spell was broken. The air filled with the officers' screams and the roar of the artillery barrage. We went over the top, running into the storm of steel, and the world dissolved into noise and terror. I fought that day. I fired my rifle. I don't know if I hit anyone. It was all a blur of smoke and fear. I wasn't fighting for Hitler or for Germany or for any grand ideal. I was fighting because the machine demanded it. To stop was to be crushed by it. To run was to be shot by your own side or the other. You fought because the man next to you was fighting, and you didn't want to let him down. You fought because it was the only way to get through the next 5 minutes. That's the dirty little secret they don't tell you. In the end, you don't fight for flags or countries. You fight for the guy in the hole next to you. You fight because you're scared, and because you want to go home. And you know, with a sickening certainty, that the man coming at you with a bayonet is doing exactly the same. After that attack, everything changed. The lines shifted, we were pushed back. The fragile understandings of the static front evaporated in the chaos of retreat. I never saw Joe again. I never knew what happened to the wounded boy or the white ghost. But I carried those moments with me, those pockets of peace in a world gone mad. They were the only things that felt real, the only things that proved we were still human beings and not just cogs in the great, bloody machine. When I finally surrendered, months later, my hands in the air, my war over, I wasn't thinking of victory or defeat. I was just tired. An American soldier, not much older than me, came forward to take my rifle. He looked me in the eye, and for a second I saw the same exhaustion, the same relief I felt. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and I nodded back. It was over. The silent truce, the one we'd found in the ruins, had finally, blessedly, become the only thing left.